Chapter 1 The One and Lonely. Young Jack Hart was sleeping peacefully, all tucked up in his nice and warm bed, dreaming away. He was always having all sorts of dreams every night, but they were always about the same type of thing, the outdoors. Whenever Jack had time away from his jobs around the village, you could guarantee that he was out on the hills somewhere trying to encounter some untouched area. In this certain dream, Jack was deep inside a darkened forest with paths going off in all sorts of different directions. Jack felt confused about which paths to take, but also at the same time he was disappointed that he couldn't try all of them at once. After a few rounds of eeny, meeny, miny, mony, he had decided to take the path that was leading northwest. This path looked rather interesting when Jack took in what was around him. The path was going down lower and lower, and Jack had no clue what was at the end. As the trail got lower, the dirt wall on Jack's left was getting higher and higher. Plants and roots were growing out, and on Jack's right was a cliff that looked down to black. Focused and determined though Jack was, he couldn't lie to himself and say that this did not make the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. But nevertheless, he pressed on. Fog was slowly making itself known now around Jack's ankles, which didn't help him keep calm at all, and he was wishing he had taken a different path. One that wasn't so frightening. Still, Jack carried on down the dirt road, which was still going lower and lower, and the fog was also getting thicker and thicker. Jack had accepted the fact that this path was clearly frightening, and that something horrible was coming awfully soon. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Jack began to hear voices. Faint voices calling out to him, but still so faint that he could not understand them. So he decided that it wasn't anything to be concerned about. But the voices were starting to get louder and more clearer. It was definitely an older male voice, and it was calling Jack's name. Just his name and nothing more. And suddenly, the voice was magnified 1,000 times and echoed throughout the entire forest. And as quickly as it came, it vanished till the voice was reduced to a normal speaking voice, and at that moment Jack realized he was sitting upright in his bed and he had been woken up by his father shouting at him, telling him to wake up. "Jack! Jack!" his father repeated, kept shouting, sounding like a broken record. Yes, I'm awake," Jack said as he struggled to open his eyes against the morning sun. "About time too. Come on now, I need you to do a few things for me today. Just little things," Jack's father said as his voice faded away down the hallway. "If they're so little, why do I need to be up at the crack of dawn to do them?" said Jack quietly to himself so his father wouldn't hear. Jack's father's name was Simon Hart, and was well known around the area for being the local blacksmith. He was a rather small, quirky man who wore round glasses, did not have any hair on the top of his head, but what he did have was thinning. Simon also had a fairly small hands which were wrinkled and veiny all over. Jack Hart was Simon's son, and was no more than 12 years old. Jack, unlike his father, had a full head of brown short hair, had blue eyes, and also, unlike his father, had no sign of wrinkles in his hands. After 10 minutes of debating with himself, Jack had finally decided to get out of his comfy bed and do whatever jobs his father had prepared for him. Jack was used to running his father's errands for him, and most of the time they were literally little things that Simon could have done himself, such as fetching clean water or going out to get more firewood. Except for the one time Jack had to steal a live pig for food and wasn't aware that he was actually stealing it. But other than that, they were not very difficult errands at all. Jack made his way into the kitchen to find his father boiling the pot over the fire. "What have I got to do today?" asked Jack, still stiff and rubbing his eyes. "Oh, hello, my boy. Glad to see you decided to show yourself," said Simon, sounding as though he hadn't seen his son all morning. "Just a few things today, lad. I need you to go out into the fields and pick just a bit of everything, really. You know, cabbages, tomatoes, carrots, mushrooms, potatoes, and corn. And when that's done, my boy, obviously we're going to need more water and firewood." "Yeah, just a small thing, right?" whispered Jack to himself. If there was one job that Jack hated more than any other, it was getting the firewood. Since Jack was only 12 years old, it took him almost triple the amount of time to get half of what all the other villagers were able to get. So he was always left that until everything else had been done. Jack rounded up all the tools he needed, such as gloves, scissors, and his small, weak, blunt axe. "All right then, Dad, I'll be back later on," said Jack. "Yes, all right, my boy, I'll see you when you get back," said Simon as he waved goodbye to his son. Jack closed the front door and made his way to the open fields, which were on the other side of the village. The village that Jack and his father lived in was called Wrangleton. It was a very small place with a population of no more than 250 people. In Wrangleton, everyone knew one another and everyone's history, and it was easy to tell when someone wasn't from the village. Wrangleton was also located in quite a bizarre area. It spread over the river, so half of the village was on one side and the rest on the other, which was handy for Jack because this meant that he never had to travel far to collect the water. But if anyone wanted to cross to the other side, they would have to cope with getting the waist-deep river because no one had ever made a bridge. After certain times when the weather had been rough, there was sometimes no way to get across. Once Jack had finally collected the vegetables and the water for his father he had asked for, it was time to attempt to collect the firewood. This meant wandering into the nearby forest and finding the weakest-looking tree so Jack would not spend so long in there. The forest was rather large, and the deeper Jack went in, the darker it became due to the thickness of the trees. As soon as he entered the forest, Jack was instantly reminded of the dream he was having that same morning. The scene was quite different from that is in Jack's dream, but it still had the same eerie feel. Jack started dashing around looking for the smallest and thinnest trees while trying his hardest not to go in so deep. At last he stumbled upon the tree that would suffice. Just on the outskirts was a reasonable-sized tree. Exceptionally thin, but still reasonable size. "Ah, this one looks choppable," said Jack, wondering if what he had just said made sense. It was nearing lunchtime now, and Jack's stomach was beginning to protest. So without any more procrastinating, he started hacking away at the defenseless trees, and within minutes the tree was lying flat on the earth. Starting to get fed up, Jack cut the tree into smaller pieces, fitted what he could into his bag, and set off for home again. "Is this enough, Dad?" asked Jack as he showed his father what he had managed to round up. Yes, of course, my boy. Thank you, I'll make you some soup for lunch." "Oh, okay. I think I need it too," said Jack, now aching with hunger. Within 10 minutes or so, hot tomato soup and bread was sitting on the table, and in the next 5 minutes, it was gone. Jack was clearly more hungry than he thought he had been, but now he felt full up and able to move again. "Anything else need doing, Dad?" Jack asked his father, hoping deep down that he would say no. Let me think for a minute," said Simon as he counted the jobs on his fingers. "No, I think that's all I needed doing today, my boy. You can go now and do whatever it is you do for fun these days." Jack smiled at his father and picked up his bag, even though it was empty, and left again almost instantly. Knowing that Jack had a free afternoon with no pressure on his shoulders to get anything done, the outside world seemed even more enchanting than it had been this morning. He could hear the local townsfolk merrily chatting away, and the sound of the smell of the river filled his nostrils and ears. But today Jack had no intention of going to the village, or the river. No. Since today it was extremely warm and sunny, he headed straight for the nearby hills, where he always went on nice days like this one. It wasn't a long walk to the hill. In fact, Jack found it rather enjoyable. He had to pass through the field that had just come from, but since he wasn't picking any food from it, it was a beautiful place to be. Eventually, the fields started to raise up and form into a hill Jack was headed for. Whenever Jack had nothing to do, he would come up to the top of the hill, look out to the village of Wrangleton, the forest, and the grey mountains, just think about all sorts of wonderful things. And today would be no different. Except that when Jack arrived at the top, something took him completely by surprise. There was someone already sitting there.